Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, and welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, I have a lovely guest. Her name is Linda Knipe, and she's a fellow therapist like myself. Linda has retired from being a school counselor. She's an author and really enjoys writing at her Lake Ontario cottage. That sounds so beautiful. She's a Rotarian and arts advocate. She holds advanced degrees in counseling and contributed to a book titled Depression Lied to Me. She also wrote a book, Braving Therapy, which is her debut novel. Thank you, Linda, for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Karen. I'm really pleased to be here.
Awesome. Now, I know I read just a very short piece of your longer bio. Is there anything in your bio that you would like to add before we go on with our interview questions?
Yeah, I think that you hit most of it when you identified that I'm a retired high school counselor. So I'm old enough to be retired, and I have the white hair and the grandkids to prove it, but I guess you covered everything.
Awesome. Linda, may I ask you, how come you were interested in being on the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast? We're a podcast for complex trauma survivors. What about that was enticing to you?
I think that when I read the profile for your podcast, I know that a lot of your listeners and a lot of your speakers talk about complex trauma, talk about childhood trauma. I actually had a very nurturing childhood that had hard things in it, but I had a great family. However, as a school counselor, I worked with a lot of young people who were really struggling just with the trauma of dysfunctional families and a lot of times more difficult sexual trauma or violence in the household. I have brought that perspective forward in my writing and actually my own therapy as well. The book that I've written, Braving Therapy, is based on the most difficult period of my life, which was dealing with PTSD in therapy. And I felt like I wasn't done with it. I got through the therapy. It really transformed me into being a more authentic and a grateful person. But I felt once I retired, like I really wasn't done with that whole experience until I passed on the learning. And there was just so much learning that actually is what's resonated with people who've read the book.
Beautiful. I'm glad that people have been resonating to it because that means that they're going to find it to be very healing. Now, you mentioned that you didn't necessarily have childhood trauma, but if I understand correctly, you've had trauma during other parts of your life. Is there any of that you're willing to share with our audience? Not in great detail,
Yeah.
but it helps with the connection with the audience.
Yeah. And I will say that even in the book, having worked in counseling through so much of my life, I was really careful about not being detailed about talking about any of it really, because I didn't want the book to trigger the very people that I wanted to help. So it's pretty gentle in those areas other than how I felt. But in my childhood, my grandmother was the closest person to me besides my mom. And she lived practically across the street. And I remember as a child just lying in bed thinking, oh, what would I ever do if anything happened to her? She was my special person. And when I was 11, she died in a fire in her house. And So that was really the first incidence, and I talk about that in the book. Even though I had this kind of idyllic childhood, I buried that. Like I put it away right away. I needed to take care of my mother and help with the other kids, and they were all struggling with it. And so I just put away those emotions. I was very mature about it. And what did happen is for the next 6 months, every time I heard a siren, I would just break into a cold sweat. So other than that, everything was fine. But then when I hit college, I had a dating situation that turned into a date rape that I swore I would never, ever talk about. I wasn't even going to think about it again. And when I was a young professional, I had an apartment of my own, which was broken into, and I was raped by a stranger. And that I went through a legal process with that. I ended up talking to the police, and they caught the guy. I caught the guy, and then I buried that, and I went on with my life. I tried counseling briefly. It was not a good fit. The counselor was very directive, and I felt really judged. And so I just had a very sour taste in my mouth for counseling. And it didn't come up again for another 18 years. And when I was in my graduate program, it was right before I was 40, I started back into my graduate program for counselor education. And in my first class, I was triggered into PTSD, total shock. And I just full-blown PTSD. I felt crazy. And so I eventually went and talked to the professor, and he explained about PTSD and told me that I was really going to need therapy. I couldn't go on and try and counsel people if I had so many issues that were affecting me and my perspectives. So that's what I did.
And was the next counselor a better fit?
Yes, my counselor, my therapist that I ended up seeing he specialized in trauma. And I write a chapter about all of the things that you argue with yourself about and the myths you have about counseling and how to find the appropriate counselor. And that as chaotic as your head feels when you're dealing with depression and all of those kind of things, you'll know because you'll feel the connection and you'll feel like you're talking about the right stuff right away. So yeah, he was excellent. And this is 25 years after I started with him, and I still will pop in like once or twice a year just to touch base. And
That's so good.
things are really hard right now.
Yeah, our bodies are not cars. If it were, it needs time and attention once in a while.
Yeah,
And so it's the same thing. I call them maintenance checkups
yeah.
when people have to pop in back to therapy. And
And
I'm really glad that happened.
it
I
was
had,
very interesting too, because when I wrote the book, and I had worked on it for a year and a half and I think I had told him at one point I was writing about my experience, and he was like, "Oh, that's interesting from the person that wouldn't open up and talk about anything." I was very resistant to talking. And when I finally was ready to send it to the editors, I sent it to him first to make sure I had not misrepresented him at all, since I put dialogue as I remembered it into his mouth. So I had him read it, and he was like, "Wow." And I'm sure part of it was, that's what was going on in your head. It's because I wrote about everything I was thinking about when I wasn't talking. So yes, and then he sent me notes. He sent me his therapy notes, and I've included some of those, which people have found very interesting.
oh,
Yeah,
oh, that's so rich. I love that.
yeah,
That's beautiful. Oh, but I think that's perfect. I know perfect is not the best word, but I guess I just love that marriage between your inner dialogue and sharing that experience, and then the therapist sharing their experience. I
right.
just think that's so rich, I guess is maybe the right word.
Yeah. I dropped his therapy notes probably in 4 different places in the book.
Yeah, I haven't got an opportunity to read your book yet, but it sounds lovely. So I hope I have opportunity to do that.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so other than going to therapy and writing your book, what else has been super healing for you on your recovery journey? Because I think before the call, you mentioned believing that people can heal from PTSD. And
Yeah.
so I want to explore that and what does your healing look like, your path?
Okay, my path to healing started with therapy, and my belief as I go on about post-traumatic stress is that it is really, if you want to get through it, and I can't speak for everybody, but therapy does help, but you have to stick it out. I was in therapy for 5 years, and there were other complicating things. My first husband was a great guy, but we were definitely a misfit, and we were in a very difficult point in our marriage when I stopped, so I wasn't gonna talk about that. And I had the date rape that had happened in college that I swore I would never talk about or even think about, and I wasn't going to talk about that. So while I was in therapy and I was trying to talk about things that were difficult for me, and I was willing to talk about the stranger rape, I was not willing to talk about my marriage. I said to my therapist, my marriage is just fine. We don't have to talk about that. And he made a note of it, and he remembers that 25 years later. And because what he thought was, okay, we're going to have to talk about that marriage at some point.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't even admit to the fact that I had the dating situation, which I had not at that point identified as rape. So going into therapy was vital for me. And sticking with therapy is what I hear from people that they don't do. Like they go to therapy, they start feeling better, and then they leave therapy. And I think my therapist was very good just to try to explain to me what his goals for me were, which was to be a more emotional person that was connected with myself, because I was very disconnected from myself and I didn't understand that at the time. But he would explain it, and he kept explaining it because I would keep like not understanding. But we continued to work, and I stuck with it until I was really healed. And the healing came after I started actually realizing that keeping toxic stuff inside of me because I was too embarrassed or humiliated or ashamed was toxic, and that it was not worth continuing with the depression and the up and down and the loss of joy that were all of the things that I was not able to fix. So being vulnerable, being honest, and talking was the big aha moment. And now it's been 20, it's been almost 20 years since I really got to the point where it was years before I cried in therapy. It was years before I cried about anything. And that was the kind of start of the real healing. And then I cried about everything for a couple of years. Cried if I was happy, cried if I was sad. But that was the real connection to myself that happened from sticking with therapy. Now, if I'm in a period where I'm struggling for a while, it's like I need to talk to somebody. And it's still now, when I'm struggling with my emotions and it's feeling like I'm in a depression, I have the chaotic feeling that people that get depressed know so well in my head, where I really don't want to talk to anybody, but I will tell myself I've got to talk to somebody. And I'll do that. I'll find somebody that I can talk with. And it always helps.
Good. Was there a particular therapy approach that was, when I say approach, therapy modality that you found particularly helpful?
With me, my therapist used cognitive behavioral therapy, which is probably the most prevalent therapy used for sexual assault, trauma, PTSD. I've studied a little bit about therapies like EMDR, eye movement desensitization. I didn't say the whole word, desensitization and
It's a hard word, girl.
reprocessing. I think I've never had it done with me. However, I have known therapists that use that, and I think that is a good adjunct to cognitive behavioral therapy or to just get people through those really difficult memories. Because
It actually tends to work better with more recent trauma.
mhm,
It's a little less effective with older trauma. So there's that. But yeah, it can definitely help people get unstuck.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
um,
CBT is one of my favorites too.
yeah, it works. And cognitive behavioral therapy is about perspective. And what's interesting, and the way I wrote the book, I'll tell you, I started the book as a companion to people who were getting into therapy because as a school counselor, I would oftentimes be the person that would explain to kids or their parents what was happening, those kids that had trauma that were in therapy, explain to them what was happening. And so I started the book as like a companion. So each chapter was a different aspect. And then people started saying to me, you need to write your story. You need to put that in there. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I finally did. And it's a memoir, but it's still structured in a way that people can go to the chapter that really applies to what they're thinking about at the time or what they're struggling with and read that. And journaling was one of the things that I did. And it was a chapter that I wrote. That was where I really started being honest with myself and where I finally started to pull up emotions and things like I couldn't go to sleep at night if I didn't journal because I had so much that was coming up at night that I really needed to write to get it out of me. That was where I really started to be honest about what I was feeling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if journaling was one of the tools. What about like mindfulness or meditation practice? Is that something you ever got into? And if so, was that helpful to you?
I do meditation 25 years ago was not as big a deal. I prayed a
Mhm.
lot and I meditate now, which is really helpful. And I think, and I would go out and go on long walks and pray during that and have conversations with God. I I yelled at God a lot. Funny.
We call those pray walks.
And it was funny because a lot of the time, God would answer me in a very funny way, and I would know. And it's the same as meditation when you really sit down and are really mindful about your meditation that you will get answers. And it was the same. So yeah, that helped a lot.
Yeah. And what else? Were there you mentioned the body keeps the score before we started chatting, but were there any other books or resources that you found helpful in your healing journey?
I was in my graduate program yes, while I was in the main part of my therapy, I was also in my master's program for counseling education. And so I had access to the graduate library of the university for a lot of the white papers on things. So, yeah, I started researching right away what PTSD was. There were some explanations that were wonderful, and I put those explanations of what really happens in your mind in a couple of the chapters of the book about your memory and trauma and what PTSD is. But a description that I really loved was that memory is biology plus biography. And what that is, the biology is all the sensations that you are experiencing whenever you are doing anything. That's your emotions and the way that your body actually feels those feelings, the sensations that you have. And you put a narrative together with that. What was I doing at that time? And what was happening? What was I thinking? And that's what you store properly in your mind to make a memory. But with trauma, and especially with PTSD, which is the dysfunctional part, is when you have certain experiences that are traumatic, it's so uncomfortable to think through it that instead you just shove it away as quick as you can, which is what I always had a habit of doing. I would shove away uncomfortable feelings. And the cover of my book is a picture of a closet door half open, because it's the same as when I clean a house, when company's coming over, when I clean my house, and there's stuff I don't know what to do with, and it all goes into the closet and it gets shoved to the back of the closet and I forget about it. And the next time that I'm rushing around to pick up things and there's stuff I don't know what to do with, it goes into the closet. And you keep on doing that over the years. And eventually the closet gets full. And it's not a lot different to think of it, a closet or compartment in your head. They talk about compartmentalization, is you shove those uncomfortable feelings into that closet in your head until it gets so full that things start popping out. And that was really the PTSD for me. Things started popping out. I was re-experiencing things, sensations that were just not related to anything that I was actually doing. I couldn't control it. I would try and avoid certain situations and certain feelings because they would bring on those uncomfortable feelings. I was still like attempting not to feel the uncomfortable feelings.
Did you have a lot of us have unhealthy coping skills when that happens. Drugs, alcohol,
Food,
smoking, food is the big one, right? Gambling, shopping, any of those for you?
probably food and shopping. Yeah, nothing too dangerous, but certainly got in the way.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still my go-tos, but I I do know that when I'm struggling, I need to talk to somebody before I go crazy.
The interesting thing is the maladaptive and the healthy coping. Sometimes it's hard to decide because the maladaptive coping skills do work. They do work very well in the short term. Problem is they don't work in the long term. They give us an additional problem. But yeah, yeah.
which
That's
everybody
why
which everybody finds out with drugs and alcohol, but some things are a little easier to hide or to just keep doing. But I do think I don't want to lose my train of thought here. I think one of the big takeaways for me, and as I finished my graduate program, I was in counseling and I was working in a counseling office at the time I was in my graduate program. So I was talking with kids, but over the years beyond that, the whole negative self-talk really became a big issue for me and what I saw as a big problem. And when I talk about it in author talks, I will see a lot of really accomplished people who are nodding their heads about the whole negative self-talk. So it's one of the things that I find really gets in people's way to success. And a lot of times it's the really accomplished people who do that. And I realized in working with students and then thinking back on my own childhood, how that happens. Like the kids that are young people that are they're doing everything right. They're people that their families are so proud of, and all of that, get a lot of rewards for being like a great kid. And anytime they get corrected, they will eventually start just self-correcting with themselves. And that can turn into some very harsh self-talk when you're self-correcting, but you're being tough on yourself. You're such a jerk. How could you be so stupid? You walked yourself into this. So that negative dialogue starts going in the heads of some very accomplished people, partly because everybody on the outside is rewarding them for doing everything so well that they're beating themselves up on the inside every time that they see that they may have fallen short. And that can just go on as a script in your head through school. I would see it with a lot of high school kids who were maybe top of their class kids, and maybe somebody would tip me off that they were struggling, and it was that whole script of negative self-talk going on in their heads that a lot of people carry into adulthood. And I think that is one of the big takeaways that people get from that book, because I write a lot about how I was beating myself up in that negative script that was going on in my mind. The reason that I was so ashamed and I wouldn't talk about a lot of stuff is because I was telling myself I was so stupid for having done things like that. I was never going to admit it, because you still have the outside persona that you want to, the image you want to put out to people. So you don't want to admit those things. So I eventually realized that I only had my own perspective there. And it wasn't helping me. I was just ruminating on how stupid I was rather than getting any other perspectives. And what was just so delightful was when you finally say that stuff and other people are like, we all do those things. It wasn't that bad. We're just human. My therapist, when I finally talked about the stupid position I put myself in as a 19-year-old in college, and he said to me, how old were you when that happened? And I said, I was 19. He said, so you were still a kid? I was in my 40s at the time. And I was like, yeah. And he said, what kids do you know that don't do stupid things? And I was like, I never looked at myself as a kid. I was just beating myself up about this stupid thing I'd done that I should have known better. But I was pretty naive when I was 19. So it's really important to get other people's perspective.
Huge.
And you can't get anybody else's perspective when you just refuse to
Keep
talk.
it in your head.
Yeah.
No, that was so really nicely said, Linda. Thank you for that. So we have to wrap up because of time, but are there any other pressing thoughts or anything else that you want to share with our audience based on your experiences? I'm looking for more hope, like what you shared was very hopeful. So something like that. Any
Okay.
last minute words of wisdom?
Yes. The title of my book is Braving Therapy, because it requires that you be brave. But the entire last section of the book is the promise. And for me, the last 20 years of my life have been wonderful. I do have more mindfulness practices. I have ways that I maintain my health. I did end up leaving my marriage, but after that, both my first husband and I found wonderful partners, and we're good friends, and have had much more positive lives since then. And I gained a lot of wisdom over that period. My philosophy now is that we're not in this world to have easy lives, and we don't get rewarded with an easy life just because we're good people. That we're supposed to have hard things happen to us. That's where we learn. We're supposed to reach out to other people because we're social animals. We're not supposed to do everything alone. So I remind myself of those things all the time. And I've been very grateful for a long time now. And that state of being is a wonderful place to be. So there's the promise after therapy.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Linda, for being here with us today and sharing about your book and all of your wisdom, both as a survivor and as a healer.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's been a delight talking with you.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.